Hello everyone, welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin with that story from South Africa, where the country joined the rest of the world to mark the International Anti-Corruption Day, which was hosted by the country's Public Service Commission at the University of South Africa in Pretoria. The theme of the event was the cost of failure of governance and ethics in the public service, a collective response to tackle the scourge of corruption in the public sector. Many calls were made for the protection and support of whistleblowers, whose brave actions have uncovered a lot of corrupt practices, sometimes at the risk of loss of their jobs and lives.
Nearly 2 decades since the adoption of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the battle against corruption still rages, going down memory lane to how South Africa's constitutional democracy came to be. The chairman of the country's Public Service Commission, Professor Somalis, says every report on corruption so far indicate the weaknesses in the public sector.
Whilst we are still grappling with the legacy of colonialism and apartheid, pervasive corruption has now emerged as a powerful force with just the same destructive effect as colonialism and apartheid. This now is the new frontier of the struggle to once again ensure that the few do not take common goods and services so that they serve their own interests.
The heart of our responses and the key to their success are the people. The people of South Africa are South Africa's most precious resource. Young people have the most to lose, but they are the very people who have to find transformative solutions to corruption and hold leaders to account.
The leaders of the 3 arms of the South African government were invited to speak, but President Cyril Ramaphosa, who himself is working under a cloud of allegations of corruption in the Phala farm scandal, opted to attend to the call of his ruling ANC at the last minute instead. So the Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, quoting from a Constitutional Court judgment, outlined the impacts of corruption on society.
This is what the court said, and I quote, "There can be no gainsaying that corruption threatens to fell at the knees virtually everything we hold dear and precious in our hard-won constitutional order. It blatantly undermines the democratic ethos, the institutions of democracy, the rule of law, and the foundational values of our nascent constitutional project."
In our families, where the campaign must begin, going upwards organizationally, that we stop corruption dead in its tracks. You can't keep quiet when your daughter or son comes in with a fancy gadget which you didn't buy. And they are not made to account for where it comes from.
Former public protector Professor Thuli Madonsela suggested a new deal based on strengthened democratic governance, social justice, fundamental human rights, professionalizing corruption investigators, a Venice-styled commission to support Parliament, as well as the simplification of the Anti-Corruption Act, PRECA, so people will know that corruption goes beyond graft and bribery.
We need a new deal on socio-economic justice in this country. If we don't get that, we will not make progress on many issues around implementing our beautiful constitution, and it will continue to be seen by others as a Pockhampton village.
But with the old deal on ground so far, is there some progress at all?
We're actually not. 19 years after we have signed the United Nations Charter, we haven't actually won the war against corruption, and we are now here to ask ourselves what is going wrong.
I think we are winning the war against corruption. If each of us do our little bit, our own part, bit by bit, Definitely, we will make progress. That's my view.
Attendees read and signed the anti-corruption pledge with the hope that people would take it to heart. But a major outcome was the echoed call by all the speakers for more protection and financial support of whistleblowers, whom the South African State Capture Commission of Inquiry recommended be giving a percentage of funds recovered from proceeds of corruption. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Now to Central Africa, where over 139 people arrested during a bloody protest in Chad in October have been released after a month and a half in detention. 80 people received 1 to 2 years suspended sentences, and the remaining 59 were acquitted after a mass trial of 401 people. Outlawed demonstrations were held on October 20th to mark the date when the military had initially promised to hand over power to civilians. The trial was held behind closed doors for 4 days in late November without lawyers and without independent media. At the same trial, 262 people were sentenced to 2 to 3 years in prison for unauthorized assembly, destruction of property, arson, violence, assault, as well as disturbance of public peace. Police in Zambia say they will increase checks of vehicles at the country's borders following the discovery of 27 bodies of Ethiopian migrants. The men, all aged between 20 and 38, were found dumped by the side of the road on the outskirts of the Zambian capital, Lusaka. They are thought to have suffocated while trying to reach South Africa. One man found gasping for air was taken to the hospital. In October, the bodies of 25 Ethiopians were discovered in neighboring Malawi. In another development, relatives of a Zambian student who died fighting in Ukraine as a mercenary for Russia have received the return of his body at Lusaka Airport. The United Nations, however, says 12,000 migrants have been recorded missing across Africa since 2014. Now, delegations from African nations arrived at the joint base Andrews, Maryland, outside Washington, D.C., ahead of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, where President Joe Biden is expected to announce U.S. support for the African Union's admission to the G20 as a permanent member. White House advisor Judd Devermont says Mr. Biden is expected to make the announcement during the summit, when the president will meet presidents of African countries. The move comes after requests from African Union Chair and Senegalese President Macky Sall and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. South Africa is the only G20 member from Africa. The AU is made up of 55 member states. The United States released a new strategy document for sub-Saharan Africa in August, stressing the region's importance, the threats posed by China and Russia, and vowing to extend defense cooperation with like-minded African countries. In November, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington would have to do things differently to help Africa with its infrastructure needs, and it was time to stop treating the continent as a subject of geopolitics and rather as a major player on its own. Let's get more on this. Let's talk to Chidea Chike, African Affairs analyst, who joins us here in our studios in Lagos. You're welcome to the program.
A pleasure.
Right, so Africa leaders go to this summit, every year and come back with the picture of them standing by the U.S. president, at the White House. Shouldn't there be a meeting prior to this event to agree, a common position on the agenda?
Obviously, there should be, and that's why you have the African Union. So we can't exactly say, perhaps they have not had a formal meeting from that perspective, but I want to believe that there have been some discussions behind the scenes. But whether they have been able to forge a common agenda is a completely different thing. Of course, we know that, the African Union has an agenda in the next few decades that they are hoping to implement fully to take Africa out of the woods, at the level of social integration, economic integration, at the level of politics, and to also ensure not just economic advancement, but peace within the African region. So we want to believe that somehow that there are some discussions, backstage, and it is very critical because it is absolutely necessary to forge a common, front, when confronting some of these international leaders. Of course, you know that Africa is in a very unique position today, unlike what has happened in the past, few decades. I think it was Anthony Blinken who said recently that Africa should be seen as a geopolitical force that has shaped America in the past, is shaping it in the present, and will still play a key role in the future. And that is as a result of the new recognition of Africa. Of course, people today are talking about the new scramble for, Africa. Africa is, has so much to give to the world, not just within the continent. And I think the sad reality is that we have not been able to, in-house, we have not been able to take care of the myriads of socioeconomic needs that we have. But still, opportunities abound, and this is just one opportunity. But we must not forget that this is not, we've had similar summits in Russia with Putin, in France with Macron, in China with Xi Jinping. We've had that with Erdogan, and of Turkey, and so Africa is poised for choices, if I will use that expression, but the ability for Africa to come together and then take a common position and stand by it, I think, is what is critical, and that's why you asked the question you asked.
Right, so it's not just, this present administration in the United States that, has come up with the summit. Other presidents have. I know President Barack Obama, who has organized it in times past. I mean, what do you think the agenda should be at this time, seeing that, the U.S. president has said that they want to start looking at Africa in a new way and not in the old?
Yeah, because there are new realities, obviously. The Americans and the Europeans felt in the past, I think, 2 decades, that Africa was not of, it was no longer strategically as important as the continent used to be. Of course, you're also looking at the fact of oil, the climate change, and the fact that there is a de-emphasization of, crude oil, fossil fuel and other, which Africa has been, trading with America, and Europe and other parts of the world. And so, but, fortunately for them, the Chinese moved in. And so since the Chinese moved in, they have completely dominated the space. Chinese trade, I think it's up to, right now, it's up to about $260 billion, while that of, America has dwindled to about $64 billion, which represents about 1.1 of global trade. And so that gives you an idea of the vacuum that has been left as a result, of their absence from the continent. But because of all the other things that we have been talking about, the fact that Africa, has about 65% of arable lands, natural resources, mineral resources in Africa has, so much of it. And so you cannot talk about the technological advancement of the West without Africa. So that's why Africa, they are showing renewed interest in Africa.
Certainly. So, a country like Nigeria cannot be ignored in Africa and, of course, indeed the world. What do you think we should be taking out of this summit?
Yeah, Nigeria remains still one of the most important countries in the continent. The fact that the population of Nigeria, rather than a deficit, is a major asset. It is said that in the next 25, by 2050, in the next 25 years, Africa, with dwindling populations all over the world, that Africa is going to dominate in terms of a youthful population. And so if we can get it right politically, Africa will dominate the world. Nigeria is going to play a significant part in that, because Nigeria is going to be a major contributor to this, growth of youthful population in the continent, and that is key. Of course, there are so many other things to take away from that. Make new demands on the West, on America, for instance, just like you were quoting Blinken, that they have to look for new ways to engage Africa, because they have realized that they are now on the back foot.
Right. Interesting discussion there. Thank you so much for your time, Chide Achike.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Welcome back to the program. The United Nations agency says nearly 40,000 people have been displaced from their homes following renewed fighting in South Sudan's oil-rich Upper Nile state. In its latest update, the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, said threats of violence continue to hamper humanitarian response in the state. It said the displaced people were living in dire conditions and required urgent life-saving assistance. Last week, ceasefire monitors said they would send a team to investigate the ongoing deadly clashes in the state. Fighting has been reported in the states since mid-November, reportedly involving the National Army and the opposition forces. There are also reports of renewed hostilities in the Fashoda area between different ethnic rival groups. A prominent civil society group for the Community for Progress organization, SEPO, said that it received credible reports from civilians about armed youths amassing troops in the state over the weekend. Somalia refugees are speaking about their experience arriving at the Dadaab camp complex in Kenya. One Somalian told journalists in Geneva that despite a recent drop in the pace of daily arrivals, an arid part of northeast Kenya, adequate space in the camps is running out. This has forced many to construct makeshift shelters along the outskirts of the camps where clean water and sanitation facilities are either grossly insufficient or non-existent. According to Martha Kaudonko, a community-based protection officer, help has been provided to the arrivals since September, including clean drinking water and extended sanitation and hygiene facilities on the outskirts of the camps. The UN Refugee Agency says over 80,000 Somalis have arrived in Kenya in the past 2 years, fleeing a complex mix of conflict and drought. Somali families escaping drought at home continue to cross the border into neighboring Kenya as the Horn of Africa region faces its worst drought in 40 years. Many who have already been forced to flee violence have been displaced yet again by the drought, brought on by 4 failed rainy seasons after a 5th predicted.
UNHCR has done a lot since we started receiving new arrivals. We provided water, sanitation. We have schools where the children are able to attend schools. We have health facilities within the communities and they are able to access health. Also, we work with WFP as a partner that provides food assistance. We are only using the meager resources that we have for our regular programs to respond to this situation. So the need of funding is very high, and we are appealing to the donors to provide more funding so that we can address the needs.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, has been able to step up humanitarian assistance to conflict-affected populations in Ethiopia's northern Tigray, Afar and Amhara regions since the signing of the peace agreements between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front almost 6 weeks ago. Speaking to journalists in Geneva, the UNHCR representative in Ethiopia, Mamadou Diane Balde, said that the peace agreements were signed on the 2nd of November, and since then, UNHCR and partners have been able to increase the level of assistance as well as protection and solutions within Tigray.
The peace agreement was signed on 2nd of November, and since then, UNHCR and partners have been able to increase the level of assistance as well as protection and solutions within Tigray, but also in the northern part of Ethiopia, meaning Amhara as well as Afar. Not only were we able to have 16,000 refugees relocated to Alemoch, but since the signing of the agreement with the government, Refugees and Returnees Service, we've been able to support the relocation of 7,000 of them. So which really help thousands of refugees who have been stranded to really start rebuilding their own lives. So we were able to provide them with some limited support. Whenever we had opportunities for flying in medical supplies, we did it, but they were not enough. They were not commensurate to the needs. And yes, people have suffered, and they have suffered, and they have suffered. UNHCR in Ethiopia is not only working on refugees, we also work on Ethiopians displaced by the conflict. We have been able to support over 2 million refugee internally displaced persons because of through our protection services, shelter services, as well as our housing, land and property and additional services.
Well, news just in the last few minutes reports that the Guinean capital, Accra, experienced 2 earth tremors this morning. The Android earthquake alert system has indicated the seismic movement reached magnitude 4, which makes it one of the strongest tremors ever experienced in Ghana. But quakes of this scale usually only cause light, if any, damage. A team of experts has been sent to the affected neighborhoods, mostly in the west of Accra, to assess the situation. There have been no reports of destruction of property or injuries because of the incident. The last time an earth tremor occurred in the capital was in June 2020. The UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly and UNICEF Ethiopia representative Gianfranco Rotigliano have visited a far region, Ethiopia, to witness the impacts of the droughts on children and families and UNICEF's emergency response. Communities in southern and northeastern parts of Ethiopia are suffering from the worst drought in 40 years, pushing more and more children and their families to the brink. Overall, over 24.1 million people are estimated to be affected by the drought. This includes 12.6 million children.
Well, the most important thing that we can do is support the peace process that is happening at the moment. Peace is the foundation stone on which everything else that we do is built. But also what we need to do is make sure that we keep supporting the work that's being done by partners on the ground, including UNICEF. The UK has provided £90 million worth of support since April 21. That's enabled us to help 1 million Ethiopians and also support 330,000 children who are suffering from malnutrition. The support that the UK is giving to our partners on the ground is making a real difference. I heard stories of malnourished children who are suffering from malaria. The malaria was being treated and they're recovering quickly from that, and those children now putting on weight and they are growing. So the money that the British taxpayers give, the work that UNICEF does, it is making a difference, and that's why we have to keep going.
The partnership with FCDO is a fundamental one. It has been many years that we are collaborating with FCDO in emergencies and in development. For Ethiopia, we had substantial contributions for both emergencies and development, for nutrition, for education, and in areas afflicted by conflict and drought, like Afar, where we are now.
Elsewhere, the families of the victims of the 1988 bombing of a Pan Am plane have expressed both concern and delight about the arrest by the United States of a Libyan man suspected of making the bomb that destroyed the aircraft over a town in Lockerbie, Scotland. All 59 passengers and crew on board the Boeing 747 bound for New York from London died, while another 11 people were killed in Lockerbie itself when the wreckage destroyed their homes. The Reverend John Mosey, whose daughter died in the attack, says the case of Abu Aghila Massoud should be heard under the Scottish legal system. But Cara Whips, whose brother Richard Monetti was on board a flight, said the suspect's arrest and trial in the US was an amazing feat. Only one man, Abdul Basit al-Megrahi, has ever been convicted over the bombing. Well, how well do you love your dog? Dog owners and lovers came out to show off their pooches at the city's 4th annual Canine Carnival in Nigeria's commercial hub, Lagos. The dogs on show came out beautifully groomed and in fancy dress. The aim of the festival is to break stereotypes that Africans mistreat their pets.
Dog lovers in Nigeria's commercial capital city, Lagos, were dazzled at a weekend carnival where man's best friend strutted the red carpet in colorful outfits, part of a drive to encourage pet ownership in a country where dogs are often bred for their meat. Jackie Dimogu, organizer of the Lagos Dog Festival, now in its 4th year, said the show was aimed at debunking stereotypes of Africans mistreating dogs.
I'm trying to achieve positive pet ownership. So there's a stereotype of Africans not liking dogs or not treating their dogs the best. So with Lagos Dog Carnival, I've been able to help humans understand that dogs are not just for guards, like they're not just to be kept at the gate or outside the compound.
American Eskimos, Neapolitans, French Bulldogs, a Siberian Husky, and American Staffordshire Terrier, Maltipoos, Poodle crossbreeds, and Golden Retrievers were some of the dogs that took to the red carpet and won prizes. Panda, a black poodle mixed breed, won the Princess in Pink Award for her bright outfit, and the prize of Green with Envy went to Ella, an American Eskimo dog, for her floral dress. While Pasha, a 6-year-old Caucasian Shepherd mix, was crowned Dog of the Year. The dog wore black sunglasses and a matching red and black Scotch outfit with her owner, Hadiza Saidu.
Wanted us to wear matching outfits, and then I also chose the color that we go with. I chose red because it's vibrant, it's royalty, and it's majestic just like him.
Each year, the Lagos Dog Festival sees an increase in pet ownership and how passionate people are about their pets. The organizer is also excited that Nigerians are beginning to understand the love language of these animals.
That's it on Network Africa. Thanks for watching. I'm Jaka Rogers.